All right. Hello, business ethics students. I'm recording on my phone, but I can't tell where I'm supposed to look, but I'm also looking at my notes. Okay. I'm going to look off camera a bunch. Okay. Good. We're going to split this week up into two videos. First, we're going to talk about unions. Then we're going to talk about workplace democracy. Here we are. Unions. What are they? Okay. Union is an organization that bargains with management at a firm or at a set of firms on behalf of the firm's workers, and that helps workers raise specific grievances. So they do this using collective bargaining. They do this using demonstrations. They do this using lobbying. They do this occasionally using lawsuits, legal action. And they do this using various forms of work stoppage or strike. Okay. What sorts of issues do unions sort of address? What are unions sort of on about, right? Well, there are a few types of issues that unions tend to address. Wages and benefits. So unions, especially through collective bargaining, will help raise wages for the workers they represent. They'll also help secure fringe benefits. So, on-the-job childcare, care leave, so people can, take, paid leave to go take care of children or parents and so on and so forth. Healthcare, of course, in the United States is, for now, covered primarily by employers, and unions will bargain for those sorts of fringe benefits. They'll bargain for workplace safety policies at particular businesses or in the law, so in laws that govern not just one particular site or one particular factory, but sort of factories in general or construction sites in general, for example. They'll advocate for favorable working conditions more generally. So they might advocate for things like lunch breaks or bathroom breaks or more realistic production quotas. Okay. They'll also, as noted above, advocate for victims of sort of specific mistreatment. So, sometimes it's not so much about advocating for all of the workers in the firm as a class. It's about advocating for particular workers who have faced some particular problem. So, if you've been sexually harassed by your boss, if you think that you've been discriminated against for racial reasons or religious reasons, or for other so-called protected classes that you might belong to, you might have a hard time advocating for yourself. You think, oh, well, if I speak up about this, people are going to think I'm whining, or my boss is going to come down pretty hard on me. But, that's what unions are for. Wage theft is also a big one. So I think in class we've already discussed the example of, wage theft at CUNY. So no, not necessarily intentional wage theft, just, the payroll people just never got around to processing your paperwork, and all of a sudden you've been working someplace for a month and you haven't gotten paid. And, if you just speak up on your own behalf, they'll, tell you to fuck off. But if you, bring a union representative with you, it's not as easy for them to take such a cavalier attitude. Okay, so these are the sorts of reasons why people might want unions around. It is sometimes claimed that unions only look after their own members, and there's a clear sense in which this is true, and we'll explore this further below. But unions also often advocate for policies that protect non-union workers. So workplace safety laws, and minimum wage laws would be good examples of this. So, the unions advocating for minimum wage laws, which raise the wage floor, which in turn end up raising wages for non-minimum wage workers. Those benefit minimum wage workers who are generally not unionized. Workplace safety laws, OSHA type things. Those benefit non-union workers. Union workers can also set sort of informal standards for how workers are treated. So things like the 40-hour work week, which is sort of just like the standard for, how much people at typical jobs work in a week. That is not strictly enforced by law. I mean, there's overtime laws and so on, but the basic standard that people work 40 hours a week comes from unions. So in the past, it was very common for people in factory, and is still common in other countries, for people at factories to be asked to put in 12-hour days or 14-hour days, to work much longer than 14-hour weeks. Okay. Similarly with prevailing wages. So there are these very tidy graphs out there where you can see throughout the 20th century as there's an extremely tight and negative correlation between what percentage of the workforce is unionized and what percentage of GDP, of the gross domestic product, the money that's made in the country, goes to the top 10% of earners. So the more people are unionized, the less money goes to the top 10%. In other words, simplifying a bit, the more people are in unions, the more equally money is distributed throughout the economy. And that is a point which doesn't apply strictly to union workers. That applies to, or that rather is not strictly due to union workers' wages. That's due to wages in non-union shops as well. Okay. Even from a managerial point of view, this is less common, but sometimes you do hear managers say that a union might make sense at some workplaces because collective bargaining over wages and working conditions can do two things. One, it prevents you from needing to negotiate over the terms of the employment contract of every individual worker, right? So if you're just negotiating a single contract that governs all wages for all workers, you don't have to worry about, this person and that person and the next person, haggling over their particular wages or working conditions. Okay. And secondly, because types of behavior that are more likely to lead to a lawsuit are less likely to occur at certain union shops. So unions can prevent, for example, sexual harassment, just because managers are less likely to sexually harass their female employees in unionized workplaces, because they know the female employees doesn't have to just sort of keep this sort of secret to herself. She can go talk to the union, right? Okay. So unions can prevent sort of costly fuck ups on the part of management or just on the part of employees, right? Okay. Good. So they can also, one last point, this is, managers sometimes make this point. Typically management is anti-union. Typically managers are not interested in having their workforces unionized, but sometimes managers do make the point that you want to be able to hear, and this is actually something that came up in the previous week, you want to be able to hear when employees have serious concerns, moral concerns, but also other sorts of concerns about the workplace. But the more sort of precarious, the more people feel like their jobs are on the line, or there's, they have to be quiet, they have to sort of, say what they think their managers want them to say, that kind of thing. The less likely you're going to be able to hear what people's real concerns are. So sometimes managers make this point that, well, if you want to really hear what workers' real concerns are about how their job sites are being run, unions can sort of embolden workers to speak up for themselves and to speak up frankly, even if it's not strictly speaking a selfish thing, even if it's not just speaking up for themselves. Okay, good. You read a little bit from the National Labor Relations Act. This is the main law governing the relationship between unions and their workplaces in the United States. It protects the right of workers to form unions. If they get together and they want to form a union, they can. It also protects the rights of non-union workers to discuss their workplace conditions with one another without interference from management. The NLRA is enforced pretty inconsistently, and it sort of, I think it's been sort of weakened over time, even though it is, still the law. And the Walmart and Amazon examples show this, that when powerful companies, especially, although this doesn't apply quite as much to smaller firms, when powerful companies, huge behemoth companies especially, but even to some extent small and mid-sized firms, when they harass, intimidate, fire union organizers, they've generally been able to get away with it, although there are counterexamples to this. Comcast workers in New York City a couple of years ago. There was a court case that some of the technicians for Comcast, I think I'm getting that company right, I believe it was Comcast, filed. They wanted to form a union, and they filed a suit against the either the president of the company or the CEO, upper management. Had interfered, sort of threatened people and said, hey, you sure you want to join this union? If you join the union, you might get fired. That kind of thing. I believe in that case, the Comcast workers won the lawsuit under the National Labor Relations Act against the agents of management who were saying this stuff. That said, unions do present some real risks. It's not all fairies and buttercups or something. It's not a. There are various ways in which unions can have negative impacts. The unions can be protectionist. They can sort of artificially exclude people from industries. Sometimes unions, especially sort of more conservative and old-fashioned labor unions, will advocate for restrictive immigration policy because they're worried that immigrant workers who generally make less money would drive down the wages in their industry. So this is protection of access to the industry, but also in the case of immigration, protecting the United States from people entering it, which obviously is a controversial political issue. But I think many people of the typical Brooklyn College political persuasion would think, no, it's generally not a good idea to try to lock people out of the United States who want to get in here to work. But of course, yes, obviously a controversial political issue. So protectionism is one possible issue with unions. Hostility to management. So unions generally have hostile relationships with management. This is something that we discussed in the context of the Saturn case, right? Because it was so unusual at Saturn how sort of cozy the relationship was between unions and management. Union was, in a sense, a part of management or sort of parallel structure to management. Okay. And, that hostility between unions and management is to some extent baked into the relationship, and it can, get the goods, but it is there. I mean, that said, I do think this concern is sort of overrated. People like, if you think your job sucks or you're angry at your boss and you're unionized, it's probably you probably joined the union or formed the union or would have been pissed off at your boss had you not been a member of the union one way or the other. So I think unions can sometimes create hostility to management that wasn't there. Sometimes they express hostility to management, which managers just had previously not been aware of. And of course, just to sort of push back against this possible concern just a little bit more, sometimes this hostility to management is necessary. So, in the case of the Danish labor unions advocating for McDonald's workers who now who won their now legendary, $22 an hour wage, that sort of a hostile relationship between the union and McDonald's management was necessary to secure that. So, okay. The concern might be overblown in some cases. There might be reasons for this hostility. That said, hostility to management is clearly, in some sense, in some straightforward sense, not a good thing. Not something you want. A less hostile workplace. And so, to the extent that unions contribute to that, that's a risk. Unions can become corrupt. We see all sorts of examples of this in the United States, where unions are captured by various outside interests. They end up advocating more for, what the mob wants or what the Democratic Party wants than what their members want. That's a real problem. A related issue will arise in the discussion of Mondragon in the next video. And lastly, unions can develop bureaucracies that are just, and this will also create a related issue, which we'll discuss in the next video, in the Mondragon video. Unions can develop bureaucracies that just are sort of operate on their own, sort of independently of what their members want. In the wave of teacher strikes a couple of years ago, this sort of came to the fore in a major way, that there were some, union leadership had negotiated certain contracts, and then, sort of without the full participation of the members. And then at some point, some group of members got together and said, hey, we don't want this. You're not really speaking for us. And so, we had a wave of what are called wildcat strikes that were either illegal or not authorized by the union leadership. And so you see this sort of thing periodically, where union leadership will negotiate some collective bargaining agreement, for example, and then all the members get up and say, hey, what, huh? No, this is some bureaucrats agreed to this. I didn't agree to this. And then they go on strike or do a work stoppage or, otherwise get pissed off. Okay. So, there are these sorts of risks with unions, and they're worth taking seriously. So for these reasons, and frankly, of course, because managers are worried about the bottom line, and they're worried that if they have to pay, workers more, then that's going to hurt, profitability, or it's going to make shareholders angry. For those sorts of reasons, management generally doesn't want unions to form. I think the main lesson here is that if it's very, very important the main lesson, other than sort of getting the future managers of the world, that's you, getting the future managers of the world to understand why people would want to unionize in the first place. I think the main lesson here is if it's very important to you, for whatever reason, if you're concerned about protectionism, you're concerned about hostility in the workplace, you're concerned about the bottom line, if for whatever reason it's very important to you that your workers not unionize, well, you could go the route of Amazon or Walmart or Ford Motors back in the day, beating up, harassing, intimidating, firing the employees who are agitating. If you're lucky, you'll get away with it. If you're unlucky, you'll have a really costly lawsuit on your hands. But surely it is a better idea for the long-term health of the company, for the long-term health of the relationship between management and employees, to try to hear why people are interested in unionizing in the first place. Try to listen to workers and try to address the concerns that they have. If it's really important that workers not unionize, try to address whatever demands it is, that whatever concerns, whatever grievances they have that lead them to want to unionize in the first place. Workers who are happy aren't going to unionize, and so if there's workers are generally going to unionize because they think something is fucked up about the workplace, and the current tools at their disposal aren't adequate to solving them. So whatever you can do to guarantee that either the workers are happy, or that when they aren't happy, they have tools, ready. They have relationships with management ready to hand to, deal with whatever problems they have. There you go. That solves your problem. Okay. All right. So much for unions. We'll talk about workplace democracy next.